It has stood the test of time. God's book, the Bible, still relevant in today's complex world. It is written, sharing messages of hope around the world.
Thank you so much for joining It Is Written. You know, I'm sure you've been intrigued by the title of the program today, The Number One Problem in the World. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But I want to introduce to you a guest that ought to be familiar to you, and that is Dr. Neilu Nedleyju. Dr. Nedleyju, thank you so much for joining me today to discuss the number one problem in the world.
Well, it is the number one problem, but I'm glad to be here again, Chris.
And for those of you who have forgotten, Dr. Nedleyju is a physician of 27 years in internal medicine with a specialty in mental disorders and the hard-to-diagnose patient. Dr. Nedleyju is the president of Weimar Institute. And Dr. Nedleyju, you still treat patients. In fact, you treat thousands of patients, help them overcome mental disorders, depression, anxiety. But as the president of Weimar Institute, what is Weimar Institute all about?
Weimar Institute's motto is healing a hurting world, physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. And it has a higher education institution. That's what we primarily are. We have a college, but we also have a health center, the New Start Center. Our students learn there, but patients come from all over the world to reverse their diabetes, their heart disease, even cancers can be treated there. And then we also have our depression and anxiety recovery program that's also housed on the campus.
You know, that means It Is Written and Weimar are really kindred spirits because our message is we want to bring hope and wholeness to people. Yes. And Dr. Nedleyju, if someone wanted to learn more about Weimar Institute, the lifestyle program New Start, or the depression recovery program, where might they find more information about that?
Newstart.com. We'll tell them about the lifestyle program for the physical diseases. The mental, depression or anxiety is simply depressionthewayout.com.
And then for Weimar Institute, if they want to learn more about the educational institution?
Weimar.edu.
And Weimar is spelled?
Weimar.
Excellent. So Dr. Nedleyju, I'm sure the people are intrigued, wondering, the number one problem in the world today. Now, before we get there, who's the most quoted researcher in the world today, right now?
William Baumeister.
William Baumeister. And why is he being quoted so much?
Because he has done research on willpower and self-control.
Willpower and self-control. Okay, so what is the leading cause of death today around the world?
Lack of self-control.
Lack of wait 1 second here. Lack of self-control.
Yes.
Okay, now I've heard the number one cause for death is heart disease, cancer, these kinds of things. What do you mean self-control? How can that be the number one cause of death, the number one problem in the world? How can a lack of self-control be that problem?
Well, heart disease is actually quoted as the number one cause of death in the world today. But we know how to prevent heart disease, and we know how to reverse heart disease through nutrition and lifestyle measures. So if we know how to prevent the disease and know how to reverse the disease, and it's still anywhere in the top 10 causes of death, the problem is not the heart. The problem is the mind, because we're not putting into practice what would benefit us. And so actually lack of self-control is the number one cause of heart disease. 80% of cancers could actually be prevented through nutrition and lifestyle and physical choice things like giving up smoking. If we're not doing that, lack of self-control is a major cause of death in regards to cancer, and the list goes on.
Okay, so you've said some very profound things, okay? The number one cause of death in the world today is a lack of self-control. Mm-hmm. And then you said heart disease is actually not even really a disease of the heart, but a disease of the mind. And I'm putting my words into your words.
No, it's true. It's true. When we know what to do about heart disease and we're not doing it, it's a disease of the mind then.
Okay, now, this program is not about necessarily nutrition, but just so we understand, you've done extensive research on this. You've written a book, Proof Positive, which is a guide to how to live life and avoid heart disease and cancer and some of these things. But maybe in brief summary, you say, in heart disease, we know what to do to prevent heart disease. What do we know what to do?
Well, for instance, a plant-based diet, particularly if you have heart disease, advanced coronary disease, you should be on a plant-based diet. That's the ideal program for reversing coronary artery disease.
Okay, so a plant-based diet, a vegetarian diet. There's a lot of different terms that are used today. A plant-strong diet. But when you talk about a plant-based diet, maybe kind of encompass that. What does that mean, a plant-based diet?
Well, you're eating plants, you know, fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts as well. Actually, nuts help with heart disease, help prevent it.
Okay. So a lack of self-control, heart disease, is able to be reversed and prevented by simply making the choice to live right, and you won't get heart disease.
That's right.
You said cancer. Okay. What was the percentage again of the cancers that could be prevented by simply modifying our lifestyle?
80% according to Harvard.
80%, according to Harvard University research, could be prevented by simple lifestyle changes. Are there, and so now I'm starting to see this picture because you've named off some of the big ones, heart disease, cancer, and this lack of self-control. Are there other diseases that are out there that are attributable to a lack of self-control?
Diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is simply, it's not only a genetic disease. Genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So if we get on the appropriate lifestyle, even though we have the bad gene, we'll never have type 2 diabetes and we'll never have the complications of it.
This is phenomenal. Any other diseases? I mean, so I'm starting to see this picture, Dr. Nedley, unfold of this understanding why a lack of self-control is the #1 problem around the world. What other kinds of things are we talking about that could be eliminated, essentially, if we practice self-control?
Sexually transmitted diseases, they're in the top 10 causes of death.
Okay.
Lack of self-control is the #1 cause of sexually transmitted disease.
Okay, what else?
The #3 cause of death in the world is actually alcohol usage. So alcoholism is lack of self-control.
Okay. Anything else that
Murder, you know, homicide, lack of self-control very often.
And so when we start thinking about the list and we start thinking about all the various problems that exist in the world today, it seems pretty simple and maybe for some too simplistic. But it really boils down to this one thing, a lack of self-control.
And then things that are not so much causes of death, but causes of a lot of misery, you know, rape, depression, unwanted pregnancy, adultery, divorce, unemployment, financial failure. Those are often due to severe lack of self-control.
And so you start running down that list. You named off rape, a lack of self-control in an individual who's forcing himself or forcing herself upon another individual. You've already mentioned alcoholism, divorce, an individual making a choice that they no longer want to be married, adultery, someone making a choice to not be with the individual that they've married or practicing some type of illicit sexual behaviors. These are all choices, and now we start seeing this picture, why a lack of self-control is the #1 problem in the world today.
It is the #1 problem, and Baumeister has hit it right. He's told us that it's the #1 problem as far as all of the diseases and distress in our world today. If we could just fix that one thing, wow.
And I'm moved by what you're saying here, because what you're getting to, Dr. Nedley, is that a majority of the problems of the world today could be fixed, reversed, prevented by simply correcting the mind and how we think.
That's right.
That is powerful, Dr. Nedley. That is a powerful, powerful thing for us to grab, that many of the diseases of the world today, many of the problems of the world today, really have little to do with actual events and things themselves, but actually have to do with how a person thinks.
That's right.
And we've talked about the frontal lobe and how in previous programs, how to increase frontal lobe. So what is the real cause of this disease, of this lack of self-control?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And actually, there are multiple things, and Baumeister goes into it and others. There are multiple things that make our self-control worse and also can help our self-control. And by the way, everyone has selective self-control. That's the amazing thing about it is.
Okay.
You know, for instance, I'll just name a very famous individual. You've probably even heard of him in California. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, meticulous self-control to build the muscles that he built.
Yes.
But yet in an area where it was more important for him to have self-control, when his maid was cleaning the house,
Yes.
he lacked it, and he lost the love of his life due to not having comprehensive self-control. So what the world is needing is not just selective self-control, it's needing comprehensive self-control, and that will do amazing things.
Okay, you're using words that are important. Comprehensive, selective. I have self-control where I want to have self-control.
That's right.
And comprehensive self-control is I have self-control in every aspect and area of my life.
Correct.
You know, it reminds me a little bit of Paul. When Paul was writing the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 7, verses 21 to 24, he writes about this dynamic going on. And let me read these words, Romans chapter 7, verses 21 to 24. I find then a law that evil is present with me, the one who wills to do good. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? And so Paul is talking about this wrestling, and in the previous verses he talks about how he doesn't do what he wants to do, and he does do what he doesn't want to do. And it's this self-control which is a major component of Christianity.
And he calls himself wretched.
Now, Dr. Nedley, what does it mean to be wretched?
Well, it's mentioned one other time in the Bible, and it's to the last church, that you think you're in good shape, but you don't know that you're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked.
Okay, and then when you talk about this last church, you're talking about the last church of the 7 churches of the book of Revelation. The church of Laodicea is called wretched. And when we understand that word, to be wretched means
Lack of self-control.
a lack of self-control. So what is it then to have self-control? What's a word that might summarize what it means to have self-control?
Well, to have self-control, the way to get to self-control
Yes.
is through self-sacrifice.
Okay.
And it's actually a self-sacrificing love that will bring about comprehensive self-control. That's not a love that we can manufacture. It's not romantic love. It's not even brotherly love. It's not erotic love, as good as those loves might be in the appropriate time and place. This is a love that humanity totally lacks. And it comes from the divine grace and abundant love of God coming into our heart in response to our willingness to give up all on the altar of sacrifice laid.
Okay, well, you've laid out a lot of heavy material there, and we're going to come back to this. But you have emphasized an important point. We're going to have a little discussion here about self-control and whether self-control is good or bad, and some studies that have been done on it. But you have emphasized the point that we cannot have self-control without self-sacrificing love. And the only place that we can get that self-sacrificing love is from outside of ourselves. We can't do it alone. This is not a tighten up the bootstraps and move forward. This is a spiritual war that's going on between making decisions for right and making decisions for wrong. Okay, so, and we've talked about temperance before and self-control. How does temperance play into self-control?
Temperance is moderation in the things that are healthy and abstinence from the things that are unhealthy.
Okay, and so when we have self-control, we will be a temperate individual, and that is a word that, as I understand, is actually making a comeback. It's not been a word that we've used for a long time, but it's making a comeback in the literature. More and more has been written about it, and a self-controlled individual is going to be a temperate individual.
Correct.
Meaning that they abstain from the things that are harmful, and they are moderate in the things that are good.
Exactly.
And so if we put this, and we kind of boil this down very, very simply, okay? Garbanzo beans. Are garbanzo beans good for you?
Absolutely.
They're very good for you.
Yes.
But do you want to eat 2 or 3 or 4 pounds of garbanzo beans in one sitting?
No.
No. It's not going to be good for you then. So although garbanzo beans are filled, and you probably could tell me all the nutrients that are in a garbanzo bean, maybe name just a couple of them.
Folate is one of the good ones, vitamin B9.
Okay, so folate, B9, we need those things to survive. But if I eat 4 pounds of garbanzo beans, that is not going to be helpful to me.
Correct.
Okay. Now, we also know, I mean, in as much as we'd hate to admit it, we know that a Snickers bar is probably not real healthy for us.
That's right.
And so we should probably abstain from eating too many Snickers bars.
Yeah, particularly if you have type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
Or even type 1.
So we've kind of made this very, very practical. How can I tell if I have good self-control?
Well, there's actually tests
Okay.
that are done on it. And that's how, in order to study anything like it, like Baumeister does, you have to measure it. And so he measures it through a test. Getting up in the morning is hard for me. If you state that, that's low self-control. I eat healthy foods, that's high self-control. I blurt out whatever is on my mind, that's low self-control. I don't keep secrets well, that's low self-control. I work effectively towards long-term goals, that's high self-control. So those are a part of the questions. There's actually many more questions than that, where you can actually measure your self-control. And then he's done studies to find out that people with high self-control make better relationship partners, they have better personality adjustments, they have much less disorders as far as mental disorders are concerned.
Sure.
They actually spend money rightly, they save well, they actually have better academic performance, they actually take more responsibility when they do mess up instead of denial and shame and defensiveness. And so he's linked the good life. The psychological good life is linked intricately to having high self-control scores.
Okay, so these things demonstrate whether we have good self-control. Studies have been done. So let me ask you this then, Dr. Nedley, what are the benefits of having self-control? Now, and right off the bat, somebody's saying, well, I mean, if I have self-control, I can help avoid heart disease and all of these other things. But what are some of the other benefits of having good self-control?
You actually are more accommodating. You're actually a very good person to be around. Actually, people enjoy being around people with high self-control. They actually have a lot of benefits. And they've also looked at the drawbacks.
Okay, so what are the drawbacks then?
The drawbacks, none whatsoever. They've looked at the highest self-control scores to see if some sort of negative patterns can be found. There's no negative patterns whatsoever. And so they state that there's absolutely no downside to high self-control, and there's only benefits.
Only benefits to self-control, no downside to self-control. That's an amazing thing. As a doctor, you're well aware that there's a lot of prescription medication that are helpful to people who have illness. But with every good medication, what comes along with it?
Side effects.
Side effects that are negative.
That's right.
Having self-control, the medicine, and I put that in quotation marks, the medicine that will help solve the #1 problem in the world today. and there's no side effects.
That's right.
No downside.
No downside whatsoever.
You know, it reminds me of a Bible verse in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 32 that says, "He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city."
That's right.
To rule the spirit, to rule over yourself, have self-control.
That's right. You're managing your emotions.
You're managing your emotions. Okay. So, Dr. Nedley, how do I develop self-control? What are some practical steps?
Enhancing the frontal lobe of your brain is a practical step. So getting on a program, good nutrition, good exercise can improve your circulation to the willpower portion of your brain. Having what's called bright lines in your life, that's a term that Baumeister coined.
Okay.
A bright line is zero tolerance, abstinence, never partaking, no matter what the situation. And he says if it comes from a commandment of God, it's an especially bright line. So, you know, the 10 Commandments would be bright lines that actually enhance self-control. He's even done a study on atheists after they quote the 10 Commandments and their self-control goes up. And so he's very much into bright lines. Actually having worthy goals helps towards self-control. As important as all those things are, however, the fail-safe method of developing self-control is to put all on the altar of sacrifice laid. In other words, if you're having a problem with self-control, you have to realize there's selfishness in there somewhere. And so be willing to self-sacrifice. That opens your heart and mind up to a power that's outside of you, the love of God. And that self-sacrificing love will give you comprehensive self-control. And the more you exhibit that self-sacrificing love to others, the more of that love you will get. And so that means you're kind, you have pleasant words, you're exhibiting an empathetic love to others around you, which goes right along with self-control.
Those are some phenomenal things, Dr. Nedley. You talked about some practical steps. Good nutrition, exercise, getting your frontal lobe in good health, having bright lines. But then you summarized it and say, but the fail-safe way. Even without those other things. Now, we want to do those other things because we want to help our body physically be ready to have self-control. The fail-safe way of finding self-control is to lay ourselves on the altar of sacrifice, which means we open our hearts fully to the love of God. Let the love of God enter into our lives. Let His strength enter into our lives and find that self-control. And we will have comprehensive self-control as we exhibit that same type of love to others around us.
It's transformative. I've seen scores of individuals transformed through that simple concept.
Dr. Nedley, this is profound. It is a simple solution to the world's #1 problem. Thank you so much for helping us come to this conclusion. And as we're out of time, Dr. Nedley, could you have prayer for us that we might find self-control and overcoming that #1 problem in the world?
I'd be glad to, Chris. Father in heaven, we thank you that you are willing to give us the power. We know that we need a power outside of us because all of us with our human nature are going to only have selective self-control and will sabotage ourselves in so many ways. But we thank you that you are willing to share your love with us. And so I pray that each one viewing now would actually make the choice to put all on the altar of sacrifice laid, to open their heart and mind to your self-sacrificing agape love that can transform them and transform the world. We thank you for that love, and may we now live it in our life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Hi, everyone. If you're not using quinoa on a regular basis, you are missing out on the significant nutritional benefits this superfood has to offer. For one thing, it's a complete protein, which means it contains all of the essential amino acids that our bodies cannot create. That's unusual for a plant food. Quinoa was used by the Inca civilization as a staple food in their daily diet, and with good reason. It boasts more protein than rice, millet, or wheat, and it's gluten-free with a healthy complement of minerals such as manganese, magnesium, iron, and copper. Today, I'm sharing my own recipe, Bev's quinoa salad with tahini lime dressing. Here are the ingredients: 1 cup of cooked quinoa, 1 carrot grated, half a cup of shredded kale, 1/4 cup of currants, 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds, and you can put 1/4 teaspoon of salt. That's optional, I usually don't. This is a high-octane kind of salad. You're going to get great nutrition from the quinoa, the carrots, the kale, and the pumpkin seeds. And the currants add a nice little hint of tart sweetness. And then for the dressing, I just use the juice of a lime, 2 teaspoons of tahini, a teaspoon of almond butter, water to thin it out, and a ½ teaspoon of sweetener. And a little sprinkling of chili pepper seeds and a few dashes maybe of herb amir or some other kind of spices. You'd mix the salad ingredients together, then mix the dressing and pour it over. So let me show you. I've got the quinoa right here. I'm going to add in some shredded carrots. I'm going to add in the wonderful kale. And this has wonderful color to it, this whole salad. And then I've already got the currants and the pumpkin seeds mixed. That's all you've got to do, those ingredients, and then you just pour the dressing on top of it, mix it together, and you've got a spectacular, good-for-you kind of salad. And let me show you how gorgeous it is. The beautiful colors. And it's so fresh, much of the ingredients is raw. There you go. Beautiful salad. Enjoy it in good health, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Dr. Nedley, so much for joining us today.
It's been great being here.
And thank you for watching. Please join us again next week. Until then, remember, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God.